Hey everyone, welcome to another Third Apron podcast. I'm your host, the OC Goslin, NBA salary cap analyst. And the offseason has already got enough to an early start. Didn't think we get any trades before the final ends, and it wasn't Kevin Durant. It was one that pretty much I didn't expect, but if anyone, I don't think anyone expected, but I think I'll give you some credit. You had a little bit of foresight about the possibility that, not that Desmond Bane can be available, but you've at least explored the possibility, the pros and cons, the benefits of the Grizzlies trading Desmond Bane. You mentioned it on our last podcast.
I tweeted like 3 weeks ago, hey, I think Memphis and Orlando should maybe talk about Desmond Bane. I thought Memphis would try to use Bane to get in on Kevin Durant, and like maybe we can talk about that. I didn't see this exact trade, but that was one of my favorite fits of the offseason. I brought it up like a month ago on Twitter, and here we are.
Yeah, you suggested Desmond Bane and picks for Jaylen Brown. I would guess, based on what the Grizzlies have done with this trade, getting these picks, that's probably not what they're going for right now. So we'll explain what they're looking for. But yeah, yesterday morning, happy Father's Day to everyone listening. Yesterday I didn't have internet, but most likely wasn't going to be able to put something out just because of Father's Day. But yeah, the Grizzlies, after 5 years with one of the best steals in recent draft memory, traded Desmond Bane to the Orlando Magic for Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Cole Anthony, 4 unprotected first-round picks, and a first-round pick swap. Let's just start with any initial thoughts on this. I'll leave the floor to you.
I think when I first saw the trade and I first saw the details, 4 picks and a swap felt like a lot. Then I started to dig in on what those picks were, and it made me feel better about it to the point where I think it's a fine trade for Orlando. Number 16 this year, I don't think is that valuable. It's a fine pick. Like, it's not number 30. The 28, 29 swap and the 2030 picks, I think are going to be low. They're going to be, like 20, 25, somewhere in that range, probably, maybe better with a little bit of upside. Normally, the really valuable picks you get in a trade like this are the ones that are 5, 6, 7 years out, because the sort of team that's trading for 4 first-round picks for somebody is usually older and like all in on competing right now and kind of YOLOing the future. That's not the case with Orlando. Paolo Banchero's only 22. They're going to be pick neutral again when he's 27. So we can talk about like what this maybe looks like a few years down the line. But I don't think these specific picks that they gave up, for the most part, are that valuable. The 26 Phoenix pick is the swing piece, right? If you think the 26 Phoenix pick is going to be a top 5 pick, then this is like a real overpay for Memphis. I think that this is like the Phoenix pick is more like 12 or 13, or like you could tell me that the Suns made the playoffs for the play-in, and like then it's number 16. You could tell me they have a slightly disappointing year and it's number 9. I know the recent lottery history has conditioned us to believe that play-in teams win every year. They really don't. I think where Phoenix is probably going to be is like that play-in periphery 10, 11 seed range. So you're probably looking at a pick at like the number 10 range, which is a good pick, but it's not so good that like, oh, wow, Orlando really screwed up by giving this up. So I think it's a fine trade for Orlando. I think Bane is exactly the kind of player that they needed, right? They couldn't trade for a Trae Young because he would have ruined their defensive culture. He would have monopolized the ball, taken it away from Paolo and Franz. They needed a shooter. Last year's Magic were the worst three-point shooting team in the last decade. Desmond Bane is a great shooter. He's a movement shooter. He doesn't need the ball in his hands a lot, but he does bring an element of secondary playmaking that they needed. So I think this was sort of a set of circumstances where the player fit the team so comfortably that they were willing to maybe slightly overpay in terms of value, but they got the exact player that they needed. So I feel pretty good about that for them. And for Memphis, like it's kind of a no-brainer, right? Desmond Bane's fit with the new team doesn't really matter. You're just getting 4 picks and a swap to do this. And taking on the KCP contract just isn't hurtful to them that much. So for them, it's a no-brainer. I think it's a great trade.
So I guess we'll start on the picks then, because we already started getting into what the value of those are. It's all speculative at this point. So, I mean, I wasn't necessarily surprised that Bane was in play. I think it's more so it makes so much sense that the Grizzlies and Magic ended up doing the deal together, because those two teams, nothing ever really leaks from them. All the moves they do usually, like the details are, they come out of nowhere. Like you don't know about what's in play until the deal's actually done. Now, I want to do a just quick analysis about the Magic situation. Now I can do this, but basically, there's not really much on the cap perspective. Just right now, they're going to be over the first apron. They basically did a 100% match. So because they aggregated their hard cap to the second apron, you can expect that they're going to decline Mo Wagner and Gary Harris's team options, not necessarily because of the aprons, or just so they can get under the tax. They decline both those guys. They're under the tax with 13 players. They'll just need one more to, get to 14. So not too much there. And they could still bring back Mo Wagner. They'll have his bird rights. I would expect them to do that once they presumably decline him. As far as the picks, so it's being compared to the Mikal Bridges trade quite a bit, and I understand that. And when you just see 4 first-round picks, it's easy to get carried away. On one hand, they're not the most far out. Like it could have been something where instead the Magic also send out their 2032, make them all as late as possible. Instead, one of the picks are coming up right now. We already know what the value of one of them is going to be, the 15th overall in this coming draft, and then that 26. We have a pretty good idea on how that one's going to shake out. So, I mean, let's talk about that one, because that's really fascinating. There's so many layers to this. I wrote about it this morning on a post on Third Apron, just really trying to explain how it works, because the Grizzlies, they already have now they have 2 26 first round picks, their own and this Magic one. Both of them have a swap with the Suns, which is kind of complicated. But let's say, the standings played out similarly. Then you're looking at the Grizzlies now via the Magic moving up from like 16 to 10. And then they have their other pick, their own pick, which was like 18th. Probably not really doing anything now if the Magic are going to be, if not getting home court advantages, like right outside of that. But I think it's more interesting that the Grizzlies now, they're taking somewhat of a step back, because they were, with so much parity in the league, we're now seeing how it is so easy for a team like the Grizzlies. They had home court advantage for most of the season, and then they just a couple of bad weeks and they went all the way to 8th place. And Zach Kleiman said in his press conference, like, no, we're pretty far away. And I think this is one of those moves that, unless you're a true championship contender, you take this. This is a haul for a player, a massive haul for a player that's never been an all-star. Yeah, you can argue he's an all-star caliber player, but I think it's just one of those moves you take and you figure it out later. And for most teams, a lot of teams that, they might not convert those picks into great players all that well, but the Grizzlies, they've been one of the best drafting teams in the past 6 years. I'm sure they're going to get some hits with this. So I like it a lot more for the Grizzlies, mainly because now they have a pick this coming draft. Maybe they can move up. They still got some moves to do. We'll get into that a little later. And that 2020, now they have I think a chance to have 2 lottery picks next year. One via the Suns, which, even if it's like later lottery, that's still a lottery pick, plus their own, because, if most of the teams return to the playoffs that were in the playoffs this year, you can probably, if the Spurs rumors amount to anything, even without them, I think there's a good chance they're going to make the playoffs. I think the Grizzlies will still be pretty competitive, but I would guess they're going to be like in the play-in again, probably and ultimately miss the playoffs again. In which case now you got 2 lottery picks. So you got a high pick this year, potentially 2 next year, and a whole year to just reload, figure out what to do with those selections, and then eventually get right back into it in 26, 27. So I know I'm looking at it pretty hopeful for the Grizzlies. There's still a lot of uncertainty there, but I trust that they're going to take this, quote unquote gap year with all these new picks and come out of this much stronger and more balanced team.
Yeah, so I think what the picks give them is optionality, right? Like for now, the reporting is they want to keep Jaren and they want to keep Ja. They don't want to rebuild. If in a year they change their mind, they already have a head start, right? Would I be trying to trade those guys now? Yeah, probably, just because there's so much risk attached to both of them, right? Like with Ja, his health is such a question mark, to say nothing of the off-court stuff. And then Jaren has this low cap hold this year, 23.6 million, whereas next year he's going to be jumping up to like 50 or whatever the extension is. And we can get into that sum as well. I would probably be thinking this is a chance to pivot into a rebuild because they got such a good head start. But if you go the other way, you could trade most of the time. I think we would assume 4 first-round picks and a swap probably gets you a little bit more than Desmond Bane, so they could turn into buyers, right? And they don't even have to trade all of them, right? Like maybe you keep 2 of the picks and you use 2 of the picks, and they draft so well that one of those 2 turns out to be a hit. I think KCP is actually going to be better for them than he was in Orlando because he's such a dependent offensive player, right? He's not good on a team that doesn't have much creation and spacing, but on a team with John Morant and Jaren Jackson, like I think he could get back to being like a league average offensive player, and that plus his defense is pretty useful. So I think they're probably a play-in team next year with the flexibility to go in either direction. Given the quality of the offer, I think the trade was a no-brainer. Like if you really distill this down to its core element, the Grizzlies had 3 max contracts and no surefire all-NBA players. That's not sustainable, right? If you're going to have 3 max or max adjacent contracts, you have to be really confident that all 3 of those guys can be like top 20 players in the NBA, something like that, or at least 2 of them could be. That just wasn't the case for Memphis. They were stuck in the middle anyway. So if you're going to be in the middle and you're going to take some time to figure out what direction you want to go, you'd rather do that with the picks and the cap flexibility. So I generally feel pretty good about that. What I wanted to ask you about, they lost cap space in this trade, right? They went from like 6 million to 4.5, something like that. And this matters because they need cap space to renegotiate and extend Jaren Jackson. So I think we assume the next order of business for Memphis is going to be trading John Conchar into somebody's mid-level exception or cap space or something. That'll get them up to like 10 million in space. Do you think that's enough to extend him, or do you think they have to go all the way to the 14 and that gets him up to his max at the beginning of a new extension?
You're just begging me to pull out the cap sheets. Yeah, I mean, here we go. Like, so right, they had about like 6.9 before this trade. Now they're at 4.5 while having the ability to re-sign Santi Aldama later. So the idea is that for those who don't understand, they can spend this much cap space, then go over the cap to re-sign Santi Aldama. I am anticipating that if they do bring him back, either they sign and trade him if there's, an enticing opportunity out there, but most likely they re-sign him. I would guess they give him a front-loaded contract because they have so much tax space right now, about 50 million below. Even after they renegotiate Jaren Jackson and use the room mid-level exception, there's not going to be a lot of ways for them to use up the remaining tax flexibility. So like, why not front load the hell out of it? Get up to like 20 something million and then decline it down to like 15, 14. That's what I think they might end up doing. But as far as the cap space, so yeah, 4.5 million. Yeah, you can basically like, because John Conchar seems like the obvious candidate. Like you cut him out. Now you're at 10.6. I think they need to get to 13. Because once they get to 13, they can get Jaren's salary to like 36. And then once they get it to 36, they can do a 140% raise, get him to the 30% max next year, give him the full extension. So I don't know, maybe you want to maybe there's something with the pick involved. But like at the worst, like let's say, I don't know, Vince Williams, boom, you're there, like 13 million. And they can renegotiate him close enough to get him to his true max. So I'm looking at like at the bare minimum, they do something like this, but I'm kind of keeping an eye on maybe they try to move up in this draft. Like now they got the 16th pick. Now they got all these extra Orlando Magic picks. The Grizzlies now are up there with the Nets, Jazz, Thunder. I think I'm missing someone. Like in terms of teams with the most first round draft equity, you can argue if it's the best quality, maybe not. But they have a huge quantity of picks now. Maybe there's something they can do with one of those future picks to move up and package it with 16. Maybe they we've been talking about in the previous episodes, Houston's probably looking to trade that 10th pick. Maybe they could trade the 2030 Orlando pick for that selection. Have 2 lottery picks and move up.
I have a way better idea. The 26 Phoenix pick for number 10. so Houston can have the complete set of Phoenix picks.
The 26th Phoenix pick for number 10. So
They're just kicking the can down the road here, essentially, and they're getting a little bit of upside. Now, that being said, the last time Memphis traded up in the draft, it turns the Trey Murphy pick into the Zaire Williams pick. So I might be a little bit hesitant. But the other thing I wonder about is, could you maybe milk a little positive value out of Cole Anthony? I think that's like neutral value money. The team option helps. But at the very least, I think they could trade Cole Anthony at 13.1 for somebody else's expiring contract at 10. And boom, that's how you've made up that gap in cap space you need for Jaren. So that's the other thing I'd be watching out for. Because I think with G.G. Jackson there, do you really need Cole Anthony? I think they're pretty duplicative.
So, I mean, I think if they're trying to stay competitive, which they probably are, I would say try to keep Cole Anthony if you want, because last year was basically the ball handling was Ja and Scottie Pippen. I don't, the Smart was injured. I don't think that, and then, some Desmond Bane. So if they're gonna, John Moran, you can pencil him in to miss like 10, 15 games a year. So if you're looking to stay afloat and make a push for the play-in tournament, the playoffs, you could try to keep Cole. But I agree. He's like mostly neutral value at best. I mean, I agree with you as far as like bringing in KCP, what he brings to the Grizzlies. I think that despite his down season with the Magic, I anticipate that he's going to have a much stronger season with the Grizzlies. I think that's exactly what they need. They haven't had this they've been lacking toughness from veterans defensively, and I think I feel like they could still like do some tinkering around to win like 45 games. That's not cutting it to make the playoffs in the West, but they could still be competitive, and they have the luxury of that because they don't have to completely bottom out. They've got this potential Suns pick, which I hear you saying like 11, 12, 13, maybe something like that. I'm honestly anticipating it's going to be like, obviously Kevin Durant hasn't been traded yet. I'm very bearish on them. I feel like it's going to be like a top 7, 8, 9 pick.
Let's see what the trade is. Spot. Yeah, let's see what the trade is. I mean, if it's like Andrew Wiggins and Nikola Jovic and a first, then I think I'm with you. But I think they're going to find a way to get a center out of this. I think Devin Booker is a pretty good floor raiser, right? I think we're both a little bit lower on him as like an A1 tier star. But I think having him as your offensive centerpiece, you're probably going to be like, you're not going to be a 25-win team. You're going to be a 35-win team. I just want to throw out, this is my last point on the Memphis backcourt stuff. The other reason I'd be eager to trade Cole Anthony is that I think there's an obvious free agent solution for them at backup point guard, which is the cap room mid-level on Tyus Jones to bring him back. They lost Tyus Jones a few years ago. They traded him in the Marcus Smart deal because they didn't feel like they could pay top dollar for just a backup point guard, right? That was the appeal of Marcus Smart. They thought he was going to do the Dillon Brooks role and the Tyus Jones role, where he was going to be the backup point guard and the wing stopper. Well, that obviously didn't work out. But now Tyus Jones's market has fallen enough that if you can get him for the cap room mid-level when you were paying him 14 or whatever it was a few years ago, now I think suddenly that makes a lot of sense. That's where he had his most success. So that's what I would be thinking at backup point guard. Sign Tyus Jones for the cap room mid-level, and then trade Cole Anthony for something else at a slightly lower salary to help carve out that cap space.
So I like the idea of that. Just the only thing I'd push back on is that right now the Grizzlies are like extremely light on bigs, where Zach Giddey's expected to miss the start of the season. I don't know what the status is on Brandon Clark. I'm guessing he's going to be healthy, but he missed the end of last season. Starting to rack up a lot of injuries in recent years. So their only other backup big is Jay Huff, he's a good player, but I wonder if they're going to reserve that mid-level for another big. But
you can also
that is another option.
You could trade Cole Anthony for the big.
Yeah. So I was going to say they have options. They could sign and trade for a big. We'll see. Like I was on CP, on Knicks Fans TV, and we brought up the possibility, well, what if the Knicks get Taylor Jenkins? Maybe Tyus Jones wants to go there. Yeah, it wouldn't be like, it might be a worse opportunity than playing for the Grizzlies, but, under Taylor Jenkins, he knew how to use him. He succeeded under him. Just something to keep an eye on. So just a little more, I just want to show the Grizzlies draft pick situation just to visualize it. Like 11 firsts over the next 8 drafts. Could technically trade up to 8 of these. As you can see, what the details are pretty complicated. Also worth noting, the Grizzlies have another swap with the Suns. The Grizzlies originally got the 26 swap and the 2030 swap in a trade with the Suns 2 years ago. They just traded 3 second round picks to them for these 2 pick swaps. So the Grizzlies have like not only like a surplus of picks, but like a lot of variance on how these can go based on some of these swaps. And obviously with Orlando, depending how they look like in future years. But I guess, let's kind of wrap it up with Memphis, because I do want to get back to the Orlando side of things. I'm just excited for the possibilities of how this could look like for Memphis. But with Memphis, just a very clean cap sheet for next year. Here's assuming they do renegotiate Jaren. You get him to that 30% max. You got KCP back. I put Aldama on a very high number that the Sens. And you got all these picks, a lot of draft picks. They've got the 226 picks next year, the one this year. So they already got a full roster projection for next year. You're under the tax, well below the aprons. I like this direction more than had they kept Desmond Bane, to be honest. I feel like there's a very good chance they're going to find another guard that can replace a lot of what Desmond does. Like, they're not going to find the one replacement at all. Like, you can forget about that. But with all these draft picks, I feel like there's especially in these upcoming drafts, you can find a good guard to be your next, lead 2 of the future. Maybe they get another wing as well, either through the draft or trade. I'm really excited, and just a very clean cap sheet. A lot harder to build off what they had going had they kept Desmond Bane.
Yeah, I think this was definitely a win for them. That doesn't make it a loss for Orlando, but I think this trade makes a lot of sense for them, and they draft so well. I think you're right. They're going to be able to replace Bane pretty comfortably in the aggregate. Plus, you get all of the picks. I think this was a no-brainer for them.
Yeah, I just think you take that and figure out the rest later. And I trust the Grizzlies, again, with their draft record. I think they'll do a decent job figuring it out. So let's move on to Orlando, look at what next year is. So they are looking at a pretty expensive roster. They're going to be in the tax starting next year for sure. They're going to avoid it this year. So this is for next year. Paolo Banchero is going to get a max extension this summer. The big question is, will he get All-NBA and get that 30% max? So here's a full roster projection. Once they get the 14 players, they are looking at like a $50 million tax. Okay, not too bad. You're right at the second apron. So this is like a very reasonable expense. They'll probably save some money. Jett Howard. Now they got Bane in, the clock's really on Jett Howard, so they can decline that option before the start of this upcoming season. Very easy ways they can save a little bit more money. But let's say the Grizzlies. Whoa, what did I do? Whoops. Okay, I'm just going to put in a number like 51 million because it's something like that. But let's say Paolo gets that $51 million 30% max. Now you're looking at something getting a little closer to $100 million tax penalty. Your roster is going to exceed 300 million. So yeah, you get rid of Jett, then you're looking at something a little more kind of like what they were looking at before. So this is probably what they're looking at spending. Pretty modest tax penalty nowadays. So it's a big investment by the Magic. And the bigger thing though, that so we talked about the Desmond Bane fit. You pretty much nailed it on the analysis. Like, there's not a better player they could have gotten for what they needed than Desmond Bane. Like, perfect fit, adds another level of secondary creation. Their best shooter probably since like sometime in the previous decade.
For sure.
But it is I wasn't thinking that far back. But I guess you can say technically since him. But it's a lot of money. And now you got a lot of money tied up in the future to Paolo, Franz, Desmond Bane. Jalen Suggs, so his salary is going to decline. So when we were looking at other players that are probably making like roughly half, maybe 2/3 of what he's making, that leaves a little more flexibility for the Magic to address some other stuff. So while getting Bane raises their ceiling as far as the playoffs, I do get a little concerned of what's going to happen if they start to hit a wall and they're so tied into these 4 players. I don't think it's like as concerning as I'm making it out to be. I'm sure it's like this is more like a year from now, more even so a 2-year from now problem. But whether the Magic acknowledge it or not, they've pretty much started the clock on one of their guys, most likely Franz. Where like in 2 years, if they're not have made the conference finals, maybe they'll have done a coaching change by then if things haven't really been flowing as much as they want. That might be their avenue to get a true lead guard if that's what they need, because I kind of have a hard time really envisioning, just because they brought in Bane, that now the whole offensive system is going to be much more free flowing. And I think they could use like a true great rim protector. And to do that, they're probably going to have to move one of these top guys. So, I mean, I don't know, are you as concerned as I am when it comes to what the Magic's got coming up?
Not necessarily. I think all of those guys are so young that if you need to pivot in 2 years, like Franz Wagner is going to have trade value. Jalen Suggs is going to have trade value. Desmond Bane is going to have trade value, right? Because this contract is going to look pretty low. The percentage of the cap does decline with each passing year. So if they need to pivot, they can pivot. I think the theory of this trade is that they're going to have this version of the team for hopefully the next 4 or 5 years, where you ride out the pick obligations to Memphis. But then you get to 2030, Paolo is still only 27. You have control of all of your picks again. And then if you need to like do a hard pivot into like, we're trading for the next star, or we're doing whatever the next version of this team is, you still have control of your picks, so you can still do that. I do have some short-term questions, though. One of my thoughts, and I think you hit the nail on the head with Gary Harris and Mo Wagner, I don't think it makes sense to have them on your books at their current numbers, given the tax problems that they're going to have, and also just like, I think they need a little bit more. I would really like it if they either opened up the full mid-level or at least gave themselves some room to do a sign and trade. I want to get one more guy in there for next year, and we can talk about who that would be. But the downside to that is I don't think they're going to get rid of Mo Wagner entirely. What I suspect they'll do is waive the non-guaranteed contract, re-sign him at a lower number for this year, but add more years on the back end. So like 1 for 11 maybe becomes 2 for 15. Now, I think that's fine value for Mo Wagner when he's healthy, but given where they are from an apron perspective, having Mo Wagner at $7.5 million for next year and beyond kind of gets cumbersome, right? I'm not super concerned with the actual tax amount because they're so far away from the repeater clock, right? They haven't paid the tax in several years now, right? They're just starting their tax cycle. So it's, to me, it's basically just about ducking the second apron as long as you can, which is going to get kind of difficult if you get particularly aggressive this year. So as far as things they could do this offseason, there was the reported interest in Nickeil Alexander-Walker. I don't know if that's still the case after the Bane trade. I will say, as far as non-all-star backcourts go, that's about as perfect as you could get if you had Suggs, Bane, and Alexander-Walker with 2 killer defenders, 2 great shooters in there. Like, that would be really, really interesting to me if they could do that under the mid-level. I think it's more likely if they were to open the mid-level. The idea would be to go after a shooting center because you can get those at a better price, right? Like, how perfect would Al Horford be on this team? Or Brook Lopez? Like, you talked about getting a great rim protector. That's not somebody you're going to have for the long haul. But if you had Brook Lopez playing 18 minutes a game with these perimeter defenders around him, that shooting would go so far. I immediately look at the Magic. The Lakers are at the absolute top of the center market. If you're a center, you want to get to the Lakers because you're going to make so much more money doing that just because of the exposure you get. You obviously have a chance to win a championship with Luka and LeBron, but the Magic are right below that.
Yes, I really was hoping the Magic would have signed Isaiah Hartenstein last year. I think that, you know, like the Magic could have topped the Thunder offer, even with the Pope signing. They really didn't. They burned a lot of cap space. They just used a lot of it to re-sign Wagner, re-sign Gary Harris. They could have done something, gotten even more aggressive, done that same deal where like a year from now he's got that team option, maybe try to get him on something less. I think it would have been perfect for what they need. But I just, while you were explaining that about the Mo Wagner declining and the possibility of opening up the full mid-level, I agree that most likely they'll decline him and bring him back. So I just did a little quick projection where I could see him getting half of his $11 million amount. That's roughly the tax mid-level. And I could see teams maybe offering that much for Wagner despite his ACL injury. So with that, you're like right under the first apron, about 3 million. So the only other way you can open up the full mid level, then you got to dump a couple guys, probably like a combination
Ed
of
Howard.
Jed Howard. I don't think that's quite enough. Then you're like, no, you're only like at 8 million. So more realistically, you like do a sign and trade where you bring in Alexander Walker in a sign and trade. You're probably trading like Goga at the very least, and he goes to a third team. You bring in Alexander Walker, because if you do that, then okay, you do like Howard and Goga, I guess. Then you have like this much apron space, so you could actually beat the market if Alexander Walker is getting full mid-level offers. Maybe you want to start him at something higher, which I would not want to do if I'm the Magic. But yeah, there are avenues that they can do to get in a full mid-level player while retaining Mo Wagner. That's still all in play. So
Speaking of Goga, I think that this makes a lot of sense if Minnesota gets Kevin Durant, because if they trade Rudy Gobert to Phoenix, they're going to have a second apron hard cap and no starting center. So if they could turn Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who they'd be losing anyway, into a starting caliber center, and Goga, who makes $8 million, that makes a lot of sense for them. Now, Kevin Durant is its own separate thing, which we don't need to get into. I'm just saying I think there's a pretty clear fit there, and I think the Lakers would be interested in Goga as well. But you don't need the full mid-level to use the full mid, like to use that exception, right? Like what you really want to do is just get far enough above the tax mid-level that you can beat the market there. So like, could you get Al Horford for 1 year, $8 million? My suspicion is you'd have a pretty good chance, although I think there's going to be some other suitors. Could you get Brook Lopez at that price? I think that's possible. So I don't think you have to go up to 14 million to get Lopez or Horford. If you can get up to 8 or 9, I think you have a pretty good shot.
Yeah. I mean, we just saw the Steven Adams extension. I wouldn't say that means it's like a 1-for-1 comparison for guys like Capella or those guys you offered. It is possible they might get a little less. So, for guys like Capella and Horford, who are still extension eligible, I would say you probably have a slightly better chance of getting above that range you gave if they've agreed to an extension now. But, the Celtics have a lot of uncertainty. They're looking to save money, so I doubt they're going to extend Horford unless it's like something super team friendly. And I mean, the Hawks, it just seems like they're going to move on. It seems like both sides are ready to move on. But yeah, I mean, any other thoughts on the trade we didn't touch on?
So I think it's just an important, why don't we just like, where do we think the Magic are right now in the East? Mm-hmm. I think Indiana and Cleveland are pretty clearly 1 and 2 for the moment. Mm-hmm. And then I would probably have Orlando and the Knicks in a second tier under that. Does that seem reasonable to you? Do you think if Miami gets Durant, they're in that range? Do you think if Philly is healthy, they're in that range? Does Detroit have avenues to get to that place? Like, I'm trying to figure out broadly a range for Orlando where I think they could be. And the likeliest outcome to me is like a 3 or a 4 seed. Where are you at with them?
So I've got the Cavs for next season, like a tier of their own. I think what they did last year, there's a good chance they repeat that. They were just so decimated with injuries this year. They didn't even have a chance once the second round started. Then you got like the Knicks, Cavs. And then I would say if the Heat get Kevin Durant, like in the same tier as the Magic, I'd give slight edge to the Heat because of coaching, the continuity, the experience. So I've got the Magic right now. Like it's an exciting trade, but this goes back to my issues I have with their offense. You bring in Bane, but you're not like, it's not like you're overhauling the way they play. You're still a lot of ISO heavy stuff with Paolo. Hopefully, and a lot more is now depending on Suggs to remain healthy. They'll need a lot of facilitation from him and Bane. So no matter what, you're going to need all these guys healthy if you're going to contend for a championship, make a deep playoff run. But when I look at the high end, outcome of this offense, I view it as inferior to all those other teams I mentioned. So I have a hard time right now seeing them defeat these other teams we mentioned for next year. Maybe Paolo can make a massive leap to be an all NBA player. That can really help with that. But that's my initial take on this, is that I'm not getting too carried away by this trade. I still like the field over them right now, as far as being a true contender.
So my argument would be they've been a top 3 defense 2 years in a row, and they were a top 3 defense this year despite being decimated by injuries. That's the headliner, right? If you're the number 3 defense, you kind of only have to be average on offense to be like a contender or pretty close. If they're the 14th offense next year, they're probably a 50-plus win team. As far as Paolo goes, I don't like when anybody treats Paolo like he's a known commodity at this point, because we saw this with Cade this year, where Cade finally gets even a modicum of spacing around him, and all of a sudden he's an all NBA player. Paolo has just played on the worst shooting team in the last decade, and the Magic have not had a top 10 offense in, I don't even know what it is. It's like 15 years now or something crazy like that. I think just putting Desmond Bane in that shooting guard slot gets your spacing up to like the lower end of acceptable. And I think that could make such a difference for Paolo that in turn, he makes an obvious leap, right? I think what we saw out of Franz Wagner before he got hurt when Paolo was out was such a leap as a pick and roll creator that team is actually going to be pretty annoying to defend, because even though they don't have like one obvious high usage point guard type, they have so much ball handling from so many different places that if the spacing is remotely acceptable, they're going to be pretty good, right? Like I think they're probably going to be something like the 15th best offense in the NBA next year, but the 15th best offense plus the third best defense is a very, very good team.
Look, the Magic are going to be a very good team. I agree. Like part of this trade is now the Magic they're going to be relevant for the next few years, next 3-4 years at least, hopefully. So understand doing this trade at least from that perspective. Just in terms of their highest end outcomes, I just don't feel that great about that theory of you're having like point guard kind of like divided into 4 players. Like I just have a hard time seeing the offense reach the levels it needs to when that's what you're depending on. And so, yeah, I mean, that's just more my hang up. Whereas I had another point I was going to make, but like the Pacers. Like the Pacers, they just showed like the Magic. They have this theory like they need size at every position. They don't really necessarily want to have like the biggest center. I'm sure they would like to, but like they just want size at every position. The Pacers just showed like you don't need to be that huge. You can have average size, like, and just elite spacing, players who can shoot at above average in all positions. And yeah, they're playing a little over their, history might show that maybe this is a little bit of like a Cinderella run. Like this might be their best chance ever, but they did it. Like they showed like if you can go really far while not having such a big team and they have an elite playmaker, but just have like a great playmaker at the very least to help facilitate all this and make all your other guys like play 5% better, 10% better. So yeah, just as far as like the highest end, like being a true contender, I'm just a little skeptical right now. I could be wrong. Time will tell though.
Yeah, I would just say I'm personally of the belief that there's no single formula to building a great team. If you want to have a great team, I think the most important thing is just have a lot of very good players that all do different things, so that when you go down the list, every major skill that you need is covered in some capacity. I do think your concerns are potentially warranted, but I think they're in a position where all their guys are young enough that if they wanted to pivot in 2 years, like, look, let's say we go through the next 2 years and like the Pacers win the East again next year, and then the Celtics come back and win it again in 27. Well, then Cleveland is also probably going to be pretty annoyed with where they are. And suddenly Franz Wagner for Darius Garland as a base is like sensible for both sides, right? Like, let's see what the next few years bring. I think as far as high-end players go, there's not an easier position to fill than point guard. I think supply really outweighs demand when it comes to point guard most of the time. It's why when we talk about like Atlanta and potentially trading Trae Young, well, where are they going to send him? There aren't that many teams that need a point guard. Ja Morant, we've had that concern as well when we were talking about them rebuilding. Like, there are always good point guards on the market, and they're rarely like a really, really wide pool of teams that want point guards. So if they have to trade Franz or they have to trade Suggs or they have to trade Bane, I think in 2 years they'll be able to do that. But for now, I want to see what this version of the team looks like before I make any like wide declarations.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I just look ahead. That's what I do. I look years into the future and like ways that could address potential issues that might come. Like it's, so we'll see. Yeah, this is like more like 2 year from now problem. So we'll revisit this in 2027. But again, just Memphis, like going from getting like the Grizzlies weren't even supposed to have a first round pick in 2020. Like I just want to run back like the history of that. They traded their 2020 pick to the Celtics 10 years ago for Jeff Green. And I don't know if you remember, like there was a lot of when the Celtics had all these extra future picks, they were like, hey, that Grizzlies pick, that could be pretty good. That one might be like a lottery pick. The Grizzlies with like Randolph Gasol, that team, they're starting to tail off. Maybe that could be a nice pick eventually. And it turned out, well, the Grizzlies lucked out in the lottery, got John Morant, almost made the playoffs 2020. So it was like an end of lottery pick, 14th overall, became Aaron Nesmith. And he'd be really nice on the Grizzlies right now. But they instead got a pick back by trading 2 second-round picks for the last pick in the first round 2020 that became Desmond Bane. 5 years later, they got amazing production out of him. Arguably, you could make a case from being the third best player from the draft. I would say fourth, right after Edwards, Halliburton, and Maxey. And they were able to essentially turn 2 second-round picks into what is now 4 unprotected firsts, and potentially a very valuable one next year. So just unbelievable series of transaction for the Grizzlies, and I'm excited for see what they've got going on next.
Have you given up on LaMelo Ball? Like you like Bane more than LaMelo Ball?
I would say no. I would say so far, just based on what these players have done. I mean, would you say Desmond Bane has produced more for the Grizzlies than LaMelo has done for the Hornets?
Yeah, I think Desmond Bane is a winning player, and LaMelo Ball thus far has not been, but like LaMelo Ball, I could see being like a second team All NBA guy in the perfect context, which Desmond Bane is just never going to be. Like if you're asking who would I rather have, it's going to be contextual based on the team. But like it is a little jarring to hear at this stage anybody thinks that Desmond Bane is better than LaMelo Ball, and it's not crazy. Like it was just kind of jarring to hear.
I mean, you could make the case just you can sit. I think LaMelo Ball is more talented than Desmond Bane, but in terms of the contract and how, I mean, both players don't really need the ball that much. The defense, I'm sure most teams would probably prefer to have Desmond Bane. Doesn't mean he's better than LaMelo, though I think a lot of teams would agree he is. So I would say, like, if you're doing a redraft and you're still looking at potential, you could still make a case for LaMelo over Desmond Bane. I know it's not really not that important of a debate, but just in terms of what Desmond Bane has done for the Grizzlies versus what LaMelo has done, I would say, Bane would be fourth in most redrafts right now. But that's just my opinion. We're just splitting hairs here. Sam, thanks for joining me. This was a awesome discussion on the Desmond Bane trade. Hopefully more trades to come. I'll be having you back on. Got anything we should be looking out for?
CBS Sports, we're just waiting for a Durant trade at this point. Got a whole bunch of stuff to do on that. It's just like, come on, guys, we got to move on here. But the Bane trade was exciting because it was so unexpected. I hope that that's kind of, a premonition of what we're going to get the rest of the offseason, where there are so many teams in such a like desperate apron position. We're so desperate to improve in this like weak East. We could see more trades like this. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, I think we'll see a lot more. The Magic now, they've been, pretty conservative with their picks. Just became the, I believe, fourth team to trade 4 picks of their own picks in one trade. Look, teams, they're not valuing picks as much as they used to. Maybe we'll see more big swings like this in the coming weeks. But everyone, thanks Sam for joining me. Everyone, make sure you're following Sam at Sam Quinn CBS on Twitter, and make sure you're checking out his work on CBS Sports. Thanks for watching. Make sure you're following me on Twitter and Blue Sky. My name is Yossi Gaza, and I'll be reacting to all the transactions with instant salary cap analysis. And subscribe to Third Apron wherever you get your podcasts and the newsletter on Substack. I'll be pretty active this week. I'll see you all later.